Thanks be to God. Friends, today is the third Sunday of Easter, right? Not the second Sunday after Easter. In our tradition, we call it Easter season, and then the season after Easter, and therefore we continue to listen and ponder and reflect on these resurrection stories, right? As people of the resurrection, we continue to wonder, what does it mean? What does it mean that the Lord that we worship did not stay in the tomb, but actually he is alive, that he has resurrection? The story before us today comes from the Gospel according to Luke, and it happened on that Easter, on that resurrection day, on that Easter Sunday timeline, right? It happened after the woman told the other disciples that the tomb is empty and that they have seen angels, and the angels told them that Jesus is alive. It happened after Mary herself proclaims that she has seen the Lord. She has seen the Lord. And therefore she could testify that he is truly alive. On this same day, as verse 13 tells us or reminds us, this story of Jesus again showing up is being proclaimed, right? It probably happened a bit later that day, but I tell you, it's the same day. I understand there's still confusion among the disciples around this time. I mean, who can blame them? It was a whirlwind of events, right? If you go back to the timeline of the stories, you would realize that it's just a week prior to this when they entered Jerusalem triumphantly. When Jesus was riding that donkey and everybody was waving their palm branches, some took off their coats and put them on the street like a carpet, and they welcomed him and they started shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." That was just a week prior to this event. And then during that week, it was filled with a lot of things, right? There were stories of Jesus cleansing the temple. You know that story where he came in and he drove away the merchants and freed the animals and turned the tables. It happened during this week. And then on the Thursday of that night, of that week, Jesus gathered his disciples. He washed their feet. You know that story, right? And he even instituted the sacrament that we now call communion. We Christians call communion, right? And then after that, Jesus went to Gethsemane. He prayed. And on that night, he got arrested. He got arrested. And then in less than 24 hours, he was tried. He was crucified, and then he died. And then he died. And then on this week, on this day, that morning, the women are saying that his body is missing, that the tomb is empty. But it's not a cause for grief because they were saying that Jesus is alive. And Mary is even testifying that she actually saw him with her own eyes. And we are told in this story that it is in the midst of all of this confusion, in the midst of all this uncertainty, the two of the disciples decided it's about time. They just decided to leave the others. They decided to go on a journey. They decided to be on the road, on that dusty hot, ordinary road to Emmaus, and they decided to leave behind all of that craziness, right? They decided to walk away from it, to walk away from Jerusalem, to walk away from the disciples, to walk away from this crazy talk about Jesus being alive. They left Jerusalem, and let me be honest, they were not just leaving Jerusalem, they're actually trying to escape it. Right? They're trying to escape all of this, whatever that is, they're trying to escape it. They're leaving the others behind, but I guess in their minds, they're also leaving behind broken expectations. Right? Because for a few years, they are following Jesus. They probably left their jobs, their homes, their friends, their families. They put their trust in Jesus, and yet here they are with nothing to prove. So they're leaving behind these broken expectations. They're leaving behind a part of their story that didn't turn out the way that they hoped it would. They're leaving behind a future that they thought they already understood that Jesus promised would happen and would happen anyway. So as they walk, as they talk, they were processing all of this. That's a lot to process, right? And they're doing that in the middle of the time of grief. They're grieving. They lost their master, and they're trying to make sense of all of this. And one phrase they said that caught my attention were actually the words, "But we had a hope." Right? When they told all those stories, and they ended that with that phrase, "But we had hope." They place all their hope in this movement. They place their hope in this person. They did everything they know that they should. And now what? That made me wonder, that phrase made me wonder how many of our congregations are also carrying the same sense of despair. That probably they're also saying, we've done everything that we know. We had hope for stability, and yet here we are in times of uncertainty. Probably are saying, we've done everything, we hope for unity, and we see division all over again. That we had hope for justice, and we fight for that, and still, right, we witness inequity every day. That we had hope for healing, but we still carry losses in our lives. As your district superintendent, I have had the privilege of walking alongside many of our congregations around the district. And I can tell you, many are also on this same road. This road to Emmaus is not just an ancient path. It is a road many of our churches, many of our people are on today. On this road, some are tired, some are discouraged, some are wondering what does the future hold for them. But I also would say that it is precisely here on this road that Jesus shows up. Like the early disciples, Jesus shows up not with fanfare, not with easy answers, but he shows up as a companion on the road, as a friend on the journey. He shows up as a friend who walks with them and talks with them. I think there's a song like that, right? He shows up as a friend who walks with them, who talks with them, who listens to them, and who let them tell their own story. And so I believe he does the same thing for us today. He comes and listens to us, but he also invites us as the church, as his people, to come alongside other people in their journeys in life. Friends, we call this ministry of presence. That we are called sometimes just to come alongside people, just to be a companion, to be a friend, to listen, to hear them in their times of pain, to hear their struggles. But often, I think often we are tempted to rush past their pain. Often we think that our job is to fix things and to fix things quickly. Right? Often we make judgments because we think our job is to diagnose the problem and then offer solutions, and quick solutions at that. Often we think that our job is to have, good sounding, highfalutin, theological sounding, polished answers to their life's questions, instead of just being patient in our coming alongside with them. Sometimes we forget that our call might just be to walk with them, to be present for them, to be a friend to them. Friends, in this story we are told that the risen Christ does not interrupt the disciples' grief. He let them grieve. Right? He did not interrupt that. What he did was he entered it. He joined them in their grief. He met them there in their struggle, in their pain. And then he began to slowly open the scriptures to them as a way to reframe their story. He did that not by denying their pain of loss. He did that not by denying the pain of the cross, but rather he did it by revealing that even in suffering, God is there. That even suffering is not outside of the scope of God's love and God's grace. So the truth of the gospel is this. The truth of the gospel is that the risen Christ meets us where we are. That Christ joins us in our journey in life and in faith, and Christ comes alongside us in our fears, in our confusions, in our times of uncertainty. And Christ comes and meets us there now. Christ does not wait until we are more certain, or until we have more faith, or until we have more understanding about life and how faith works in life. No. The risen Christ meets us where we are now. Christ comes alongside us now. But there's more to that story. Because if you could remember what I said at the beginning, I said that the disciples were walking away from the others. That they were leaving their friends, they were leaving their community, they're moving away from Jerusalem, they're moving away from the place where God was doing a new thing. At this time, I believe that they were moving in a wrong direction. Because the action is in Jerusalem, right? Because their community is in Jerusalem. Because God is doing a new thing in Jerusalem, it's not yet time to leave Jerusalem, but they decided to do so. They left and they went on the road away from what I believe where God wants them to be. And while still on the road, Jesus meets them there. Jesus meets them there, but he does not leave them there. Jesus stayed with them until their eyes were opened in the breaking of the bread. He stayed with them until they fully understood what's happening. And what happened next? Once their eyes were open, they realized that they're not supposed to be in Emmaus. They realized that they were supposed to be in Jerusalem. When their eyes were open, they turned around, they went back, they rejoined the community that they had left behind. Church, hear this. Hear this. Resurrection is not just for our comfort. Resurrection is also about redirection. It's about transformation. It calls us back from resignation. It calls us back from isolation. It calls us back from the work of being witnesses to what God can do. You know, in a time when it's easy for the church to become more inward looking, in a time when it's easy for the church to be more cautious or be weary, the story reminds us that we are not called to settle on the road of disappointment. But actually, we are called to be a people who return with urgency, who return with courage, and with a testimony that something has changed. You know, the disciples, they testified that in Jesus' presence, their hearts were burning within them. And that burning heart, my friends, is not just a feeling. That burning heart is actually a calling, a summon. A calling to recognize Christ, not only in sacred moments, but to recognize Christ in the stranger that walks alongside us. To recognize Christ in our neighbors. To recognize Christ in the people around us, in the people, even those who are often overlooked. A calling to break bread in ways that heal divisions. A calling to bear witness to hope, even when the world seems determined to settle for despair. So friends, I ask you this morning, I would like to ask you this morning, where are you on the road today? What expectations are you carrying? In your journey in faith, what direction are you walking? And more importantly, can you recognize the one who's already walking beside you? Because the good news of Easter is this: the good news of Easter is this: even when we turn around and walk away, Christ still comes near us. That even when we do not recognize him, Christ is still present among us. And even when hope feels distant, resurrection is already unfolding before us. So let us be people who walk with others. Let us be this resurrection people who listens before we speak, who break bread with intention, who, when our eyes are opened, are willing to turn around and go where Christ is sending us. Yes, my friends, the road may be uncertain, but we do not walk it alone. Thanks be to God, because the risen Christ always walks with us. Amen.